Destroy Lonely, the second half of the Opium twins, and to many, the more talented of the two. Although I'm going to be honest, to me, Ken's definitely the one. But putting that all aside, you really can't deny that Lonely has talent and drive as an artist, dropping non-stop for the past couple years, building his brand, going on a crazy sold-out tour with Cardi and Ken, and carving out his own lane in the rap game. I mean, right now at the age of only 23, he's hitting higher heights in his career than most artists can ever hope for, and it really seems like he can never be stopped. But looks can definitely be deceiving, because behind all that mysterious opium aura lies a darker side to Lone. And that, alongside a pretty disappointing album in the sales department, has really started to show the cracks and destroy Lonely's persona, and that's led many fans to wonder what happened to Lonely. Well, let's find out today when we look into the story of Destroy Lonely. Bobby Wardell Sandyman III. Wow, that is a crazy name. It's kind of funny how his real name sounds like Edward Skeletrix's fake name. Huh? Anyways, moving on. Was born in Atlanta, Georgia, July 30th, 2001, being primarily raised by his mother and grandmother, with his father, who he's named after, being in and out of the picture for a lot of his early years. However, there might be a good reason for that, because his father is actually a somewhat popular rapper himself, going under the name I-20, and even being signed to Ludacris's label, Disturbing the Peace. His main claim to fame would be appearing on the track Move Bitch, as well as getting on the soundtrack for Too Fast, Too Furious, so he definitely wasn't a small artist by any means. And because of his connections in the rap game, he was able to take Lonely on tour with him when he was only 4 years old, getting to know people like Ludacris and 2 Chainz, which of course would help him out later in his career. Well, possibly. It's been heavily speculated that Destroy Lonely might be some sort of nepo baby, but I'm not really sure if that's true, considering the type of music that he makes and the type of music that his father makes. I mean, it definitely is possible that one of his prior connections that his father got him did help him out in his career, but I think he mostly built himself up on his own. I mean, I really don't think I-20 was calling up Playboy Cardi on the phone and saying, "Hey, can you get my son on board?" And Cardi was like, anyways, alright. But on top of being a popular rapper, I-20 also had a lot of different children with a lot of different mothers, which of course gave Destroy Lonely a lot of step siblings. Unfortunately though, he never really grew up alongside them, and being an only child himself, he was very lonely in his early life, which gave him the nickname Lonely. And he only became more isolated once he got to middle school, realizing that he didn't really fit in with any of the kids there, and asking his mother if he could drop out and do online schooling, which definitely wasn't a good idea for a kid that young, because it meant that he was isolated more times than not. I mean, I'm not sure why he was having such a problem socially. There are some rumors that he has autism, and because of that he has a harder time reading social cues, but at the same time I feel like he should have been able to tell the other kids that his uncle is Ludacris and that he went on tour with them. I mean, that gets you instant cool points in middle school. My dad can outrun your dad. Well, my dad can out-rap yours. I mean, come on, dude. But unfortunately, he would decide to fully drop out and start pursuing online classes, taking away that social aspect of his life and meaning that he would only see his mother and grandmother on a daily basis, which of course led him to develop depression very early on in life. But things weren't all bad at this time, because he would start to listen to a lot of different types of music from many different artists, with people like Young Thug, Lil Wayne, and Future being shown to him by his mother, as well as him developing his own musical taste through bands like Crystal Castle, Deftones, and The Cure, as well as him eventually discovering the SoundCloud app around 2014, where he would mostly be drawn to artists like Playboy Cardi and Lil Uzi Vert, who I would consider his biggest inspiration during that time. And just like pretty well every other kid growing up during this time, after realizing that he could put his own music on the app and have the possibility of blowing up and becoming a mainstream artist just like Lil Uzi Vert, Playboy Cardi, and Famous Dex, he decided to start making his own stuff. But at first, he wasn't rapping, he was actually making beats. This was pretty short-lived, considering the fact that he considered his own beats some of the worst of all time, which I don't really think is a reason to stop. I mean, look at Smoke Perp, he made some of the worst beats of all time and he still made it as a big-time artist, so he should have kept going. But either way, he ended up putting it down, and around the same time, he would also quit online schooling and return to public school. He ended up returning around the age of 15, which of course was the prime time for the Xandemic, and Destroy Lonely, not wanting to miss out on that trend, decided to start popping some Xannies himself. Now, a lot of people like to describe this time in his life like it was very dark and he was really going through it, but considering the fact that he was a socially awkward 15-year-old kid who was a very big fan of the SoundCloud wave, he really wouldn't have stood out that much at the time. I mean, unfortunately, this was a period in human history where basically every kid was doing Xanax, the rappers were talking about Xanax. I mean, I live out in buttfuck Canada, and I remember a bunch of kids doing Xanax at the time, so it definitely was a worldwide trend. I mean, simpler days, man, simpler days. But anyways, this period of drug use would lead to the second half of his name being destroyed, because apparently during this period he was trying to destroy himself and everybody around him, which eventually led to the name Destroy Lonely. I mean, it's not rocket science. However, it was only a couple months before he would fully give up on his drug use. I mean, probably because he ran out of money, let's be honest, but he would instead start to spend all his time and energy on making music. With him recording his first ever track at the newly installed school studio, with one of his teachers taking notice of how dedicated he was to making music and giving him free reign to come there and make it whenever he wanted. I mean, I don't blame his teacher. It probably was an upgrade from him coming to class every day high off his ass and drooling all over his books, so they let him cook. Although by doing this, they basically spelt the end for his academic career, because after he realized that he could make music whenever he wanted as long as he was at school, he started skipping classes almost every day and recording music from sun up to sundown. Although let's be honest, it probably wasn't that big of a loss. I don't really think this guy was ever going to be a doctor or a lawyer. I mean, it could be worse. He could be a YouTuber, right? During this period in 2015, he would go under the name Tundra Boy Lonely, dropping a couple tracks on SoundCloud during the year, although most of them are now deleted but can be found through re-upload, and by listening to them, you can definitely tell that the Lil Uzi Vert influence was heavy. However, he would eventually start to move away from that style and begin to find his own in mid-2016, dropping a track called No Face, No Case, which came along with a music video where the world got to see their first ever glimpse of what Destroy Lonely looked like in his natural element. I mean, it's really nothing special. It's basically him dancing around in the dark, but at least he was willing to make music videos at the time and try to put himself out there, which is something that a lot of artists really fail at doing, putting too many songs on SoundCloud and never really getting their face out there for people to see. Now, just like a lot of artists from around this time, his early discography is very hard to come by, with a lot of it being scattered across different platforms, some of it being lost, some of it being re-uploaded under a different name from what it was originally called, so it's very hard to track it all down. However, there is another YouTuber named Exit TV who ended up putting together an entire video going into the early discography of Destroy Lonely, which is really good. Honestly, if you want to know about every single song that he dropped during this period, definitely go watch that, but for this video, I'm only going to be covering the important ones. And the first of those tracks is a song called Glory Boy 300 off his first ever EP titled, well, Glory Boy, which was actually released on Halloween in 2016 and was produced by the legendary underground producer Hella Sketchy, so rest in peace, wanted to give him a shout out. However, this was really only a serving platter of what was to come, with him finally dropping the Tundra Boy Lonely name and fully embracing his new persona as Destroy Lonely, dropping a mixtape which was called Destroy. I hope you're not getting confused. And with the release of that mixtape, the era of him making music alone in a computer lab would finally come to an end, with him starting to attend a couple underground shows, getting to know some more underground artists who would eventually give him access to a home studio. These artists went under the name Neezus, Texaco Cam, and Slim Cito, with them all initially becoming acquainted at the show, but not becoming real friends until a little bit later on. The first of these artists that he would meet up again with was Neezus, and they only really met up by chance because one day Destroy Lonely decided to skip school to try to go print his own merch, and ended up taking the school bus back home to prove to his grandmother that he actually was at school and didn't ditch, and it was on this very same school bus that he would meet Neezus again, and he realized that they only lived across the street from each other. So after that, Destroy Lonely would basically come over to his house every day after school and start recording music there. And this is where the two of them ended up creating their first ever collaboration track together called Bag Full of Boof, which they ended up dropping in mid-2017, before then dropping a music video for this song in late 2017, fully closing off the year. And overall, I gotta say that it was a pretty successful year for Destroy Lonely. Not only did he make more connections, but he also performed for the first time at underground shows, and he now had a home studio, meaning that he could basically record music from sun up to sundown, go to school all day and record, and then go back to that house and record some more. However, even with his crazy work ethic, his SoundCloud numbers still weren't that good, and seeing as how we're about to go into 2018, which was basically the peak of SoundCloud's popularity, he really had to move fast if he wanted to be part of that wave. However, he only ended up dropping one project that year, which was a collaboration EP with Neezus, which of course was called Neezus Destroyed. Overall, a pretty unnotable project, besides the fact that it actually had a feature from Little Candy Paint, who's pretty prominent in the underground scene and to many is seen as a tastemaker. So basically, if you can get that Little Candy Paint cosign, you might have a chance of making it big in the underground scene, and who knows, maybe you can even pop off into the mainstream. But besides that one project that was supposedly made in one night under the influence of Adderall, that's basically the most notable thing he did all year. He would continue to drop singles on SoundCloud, he kept doing live shows, and he was definitely starting to gain a buzz in the local area, but for the most part, he wasn't really making a splash online. However, you gotta set the groundwork at some point, and doing a lot of these underground shows in Atlanta would definitely help him to build his connections, not to mention become a better performer, which would definitely become important later down the line. So overall, 2018, pretty successful as well. However, in 2019, the output would greatly increase, with him dropping 3 whole mixtapes, one called Dark Horse, which once again featured Neezus, a small EP a month later called Sometimes You Lose, and then he dropped another one in August called Forever I Love You. And this is also the year that he would drop a single that would eventually become his biggest song of all time, which of course is the track known as Bane. Now, unfortunately in 2019, just like So Fago and XXXTentacion, the song came out, it wasn't that big, but would eventually grow into a massive hit years later. However, I'm not going to say that the song didn't get any plays at all. It actually ended up doing pretty well for him at the time, and that would motivate him enough to continue the momentum that he had going and would drop like crazy in the following year of 2020. Not to mention that he would graduate high school in 2019, and with COVID fast approaching, it would soon mean that he had nothing else to do all day besides make music. And I mean, he was already making music all day, but now he had a reason to do so and not be judged by the outside world. And of course, during COVID, everybody was locked up, they were looking for things to do, TikTok would start to spike, and this would all help out Destroy Lonely immensely with his career. And during the year of 2020, he ended up dropping 6 whole projects, starting off the year with Underworld, followed up by a small 4-song EP called Lord, which was then followed up by Addicted to Money, Broken Hearts 2 Deluxe, which added on 6 more songs to the original project, and then finally closing off with Overseas. And all these projects ended up dropping within an 8-month span, so if you were at all a fan of Destroy Lonely during the time, you were definitely eating good. However, among all these projects, it was really the mixtape known as Broken Hearts that would prove to be the most meaningful for his career, with one of the snippets for the track Oh Yeah catching a lot of buzz on Instagram and eventually getting the attention of somebody on Playboi Carti's team. And immediately after he noticed this snippet, he would reach out to Destroy Lonely, getting him connected to Playboi Carti on Twitter, where the two would talk back and forth for a couple months before finally meeting up in the studio to record a couple tracks together. And according to Lonely, after meeting Carti for the first time, he felt the energy was so genuine that they actually ended up creating an entire mixtape worth of songs that very same night, which unfortunately never ended up dropping because of course they like to vault everything, but either way, that connection was definitely formed and it wouldn't be long before he signed. And that's really all it took, one snippet on Twitter which ended up going crazy, getting the attention of somebody on Playboi Carti's team, and just like that, he became the 3rd member of Opium, meaning that he would no longer be playing small time shows and warehouses all over Atlanta and would now be a mainstay artist playing on big time stages. However, I kind of feel like this is when his problems began. I mean, don't get me wrong, it definitely was a good idea to sign to that label, he'd start making more money than he could ever imagine, but unlike Ken Carson, who had a pretty prominent career before he signed to Opium, Destroy Lonely before Opium basically didn't exist. And I know that's kind of ironic to say after I talked about his history for over 10 minutes, but basically everything I said prior to Opium was pretty well small potatoes. He wasn't really getting big numbers, he wasn't blowing up like Ken Carson, he never had a project that really caught on, he just so happened to get the attention of Playboi Carti and he immediately put him on. And that's cool, don't get me wrong, I mean that's basically the dream of most underground artists, signing a big time record deal, blowing up overnight and having everybody know your name, but all I'm trying to say is since he didn't have a whole lot of backing before Opium, he would become the 3rd member, meaning that he was basically in the shadow of both Ken Carson and Playboi Carti. But honestly, it's a little bit too early to say, so let's continue to look into his career post-Opium to see if anything that I'm saying actually affected him in the long run. Well, immediately after signing this record deal, he would immediately get a big time interview on Next Generation Music, before then immediately becoming an opener on Carti's massive comeback tour after COVID named Narcissist, which once again is a big deal. I mean, he went from performing in warehouses to big time stages. And of course, being associated with Carti in any capacity is going to get you a lot of clout, and that would lead to a lot of attention online as well, with his song Bane finally catching enough steam on TikTok to blow up into the big time and eventually being certified gold. And he would immediately capitalize on all the motion that he was getting for that song by dropping a self-released mixtape on SoundCloud called XO, which didn't really have much label push, but despite that, it still got hundreds of thousands of plays on every single song, which basically cemented Destroy Lonely as the next big up-and-coming rapper out of the SoundCloud wave. Even though that scene had been long since dead, he was still making his way through it, and with Opium behind him, a lot of fans couldn't wait to see what he was going to do next. I mean, this mixtape only had 5 songs on it, so it basically only served as an appetizer for his first official Opium-backed album known as No Stylist, which immediately dropped with an incredibly strong opener with the title track gaining over 16 million views on YouTube alone and once again going gold gold. It also blew up on TikTok even bigger than Bane, and there was a little bit of controversy around this song because when people looked in the YouTube credits, they realized that he actually had a stylist for the music video and it was called No Stylist. Very stupid controversy, but only got the song more attention. And immediately after that, he would appear on Montreality, which is definitely on the new upcoming rapper checklist, so it seemed like he was going in a good direction. But when it came to the project itself, it only ended up selling about 6K, which definitely isn't too bad for an up and coming artist, but considering all the buzz that he had at the time and the fact that the lead single was doing so well, a lot of people expected at least a little bit more. And by comparing it to Opium's other star, Ken Carson, his first ever album with the label known as Project X actually ended up selling 10K first week, so Destroy Lonely definitely underperformed at least a little bit, but after all, he was a lot newer, he was still picking up fans, and his next project would definitely perform a lot better. However, at this point you can definitely tell that the label heavily favors Ken Carson over Destroy Lonely, because when they ended up setting off on their solo tour, Destroy Lonely was only the opener and Ken Carson was the headliner. Once again, like I said, he is a little bit newer than Ken Carson, but at the same time, I feel like doing this definitely puts Destroy Lonely more in Ken Carson's shadow, and it would be harder and harder to escape as his career continued. So I just want to quickly say before somebody else points it out that Destroy Lonely did end up going on his own tour in 2022 called No Stylist, where Homicide Gang ended up opening up for him. But in my opinion, it doesn't really change the fact that Ken Carson is still looked at as more of an asset to the label, considering the fact that Destroy Lonely ended up opening up for him on a tour that was supposed to be for the two of them. I mean, I know Homicide Gang ended up opening up for Destroy Lonely, but honestly, who cares about Homicide Gang? However, it wasn't long after this tour that Destroy Lonely would once again get another big hit with the release of the title track off of his next project, If Looks Could Kill, going on to gain 100 million plays on Spotify alone, as well as once again going gold and blowing up on TikTok, so he was definitely winning. And this time the project itself actually ended up selling quite a bit better at 29K, which definitely isn't Cardi numbers by any means, but for somebody who's finally starting to find their footing in the mainstream industry, it's not bad. However, once again, the project was completely blown away by Ken Carson's release that year, his breakthrough project known as A Great Chaos, which went on to sell over 50K, along with Ken also landing a Lyrical Lemonade video that very same year, so he had now become mainstream, and Destroy Lonely was still a little bit under. And once again, you can see that label favoritism shining through, because Destroy Lonely actually ended up getting on a track with both Lil Uzi Vert and Ken Carson, but instead of the song being placed on his own album, it was put on Ken's instead. And let's be honest, I don't think Ken Carson really needs a Lil Uzi Vert feature to try to sell an album, where Destroy Lonely could definitely use it a little bit more. But overall, none of this really matters, because after all, 2023 was basically Ken Carson's year. It was the year that he got to put through his massive breakthrough project, it was the year that he got to get on Lyrical Lemonade, do all these big time interviews, and finally make his way into the mainstream. He had his spotlight. Now it was time for Destroy Lonely's to get his own. I mean, after all, Ken Carson ended up signing to the label first, so it only makes sense that he would break through before Destroy Lonely. But now that his spotlight was out of the way, 2024 was definitely going to be the year that Destroy Lonely became a big mainstream rapper that everybody would know about for years. And all of this was going to come with the drop of his third studio album known as Love Last, which he would immediately start the rollout for in mid-2024. Or at least that's what would have happened, but unbeknownst to him, a shitstorm was about to hit his career that he never could have anticipated. Well, he probably could have, but he probably never thought it would have happened like this. And that was all because on May 7th, 2024, a court document would leak online showing a man by the name of Bobby Sandy Money who caught a battery family violence charge. However, at the time, there was no mugshot to accompany the file, so there was no way to know for sure that this was actually Destroy Lonely. It could have been somebody else with the same name. And on top of that, remember, Lone's full name is actually Bobby Sandy Money III, and this is only Bobby Sandy Money, which means that it probably isn't him, and everybody in the fan base was able to relax knowing that Destroy Lonely was completely clear of any allegations. However, that wasn't enough for a couple terminally online fans who would continue to do a little bit of digging into him, cross-referencing some of his old tweets with the name of the victim on the paperwork, and finding out that he actually was dating a girl that went by the very same name. On top of that, when it comes to court documents, sometimes they may drop Junior, the Third, the Fourth, or any of those titles when it comes to the name, so it was totally possible that it really was Destroy Lonely who did these crimes. And on top of that, they were able to find out that the man in the paperwork had the very same birthday as Destroy Lonely, so at this point it was almost confirmed. However, they did find out that originally there was a no contact order between the man and the woman, but at a later date the woman would ask to have that removed, so some people were speculating that the two of them had actually talked behind the scenes and were hoping to make up soon. However, it definitely seems like Destroy Lonely noticed that the allegations were breaking through online, and he would try his best to stay out of the public eye after that point, although he would meet up with the streamer and take a couple pictures with them, and the streamer ended up uploading those pictures onto his burner Twitter account, which of course made Lonely very upset, and he immediately started to lash out with a couple tweets saying saying that he never wanted pictures taken in the first place, although the streamer would fight back against that, saying that he was actually there with his own cameraman, so there was no way that he didn't want pictures. And this led a lot of fans to become upset with him, not because he beat a woman, don't get me wrong, these are Opium fans, and on top of that, they're underground fans, they don't care about women getting hit whatsoever unless it's somebody they don't like, but they were upset because his whole mysterious persona was starting to break down. People were seeing the real Destroy Lonely for the first time, and what they saw was a pretty insecure man who was lashing out at a streamer for almost no reason, and because of that, he definitely lost a little bit of aura. Yeah man, that's how this new underground works. It doesn't matter if you hit somebody, it doesn't matter if you sleep with a kid, you just can't lose aura. If you lose aura, you lose everything. And if all of this wasn't bad enough, he would also drop the lead single off of his next project called Last For You, which a lot of fans didn't really seem to like because apparently he was changing up the style on this one, although I'm gonna be honest with you, it basically sounds the same as all the rest of his music, so I don't see how it's that different.
She tryna eat my rings. She tryna suck my dick.
But fans were mad. But none of this would compare to the sheer lack of aura that he would soon suffer from once a video surfaced online of him trying to follow a woman into the bathroom, begging her to delete the video because it would make him look bad.
Tell her what you just said. No, no. I'm being so 100. I would never ever in my life. I would never ever in my life. Tell her. This is between us. Tell her how much you love her and what you just said.
However, to be fair, this wasn't for a creepy reason. The only reason that he was following her apparently is because she was actually friends with his ex and he really wanted to talk to his ex. However, the video definitely doesn't look good by any means and he lost so much aura that day that I don't think there's ever been an artist that has been more down bad than him. I mean, unless you're talking about Netspend falling down on stage, that is a pure loss of aura. How could somebody ever fall down? I mean, what's going on with these new kids, man? Come on now. But anyways, after that, I'm not going to go too much deeper into the allegations. She basically ended up tweeting out about him saying stop talking about her. She then revealed more, saying that he actually ended up beating her head against a bed frame and making her bleed. She showed a lot of proof against him, and honestly it might be worth doing an entire video on at this point, although I know a lot of people on this channel never want me to cover allegations ever. Rappers never get into trouble, guys. They're actually cool superheroes who never do anything wrong. But yeah, basically to sum it up, Lucky got involved somehow. She ended up showing a lot more evidence against him, and then he ended up responding to that by saying ho's mad, before then tweeting about how he never lost any aura, which is definitely a weird way to take these allegations. But either way though, it seems like the court case has begun. I'm not really sure how it's going so far, but we'll probably find out more about that in the following year. So for now, let's get back to Lone and his albums. So yeah, on top of that overall just being pretty despicable, he definitely lost a lot of clout. A lot of his fans are starting to turn on him and he's kind of in a bad spot. But either way, he was now ready to drop his next project and this would be the big comeback that he needed. If he just dropped a solid tape, then a lot of fans would come back and completely forget about this. And this was going to be the one, the big breakthrough project, the one that was going to put this all to rest, the one defining Destroy Lonely tape that would be remembered for generations to come. And when it finally dropped, well, first off, it didn't really have a single that went as crazy on TikTok as his prior two projects, and on top of that, the album itself ended up selling 37.5k in its first week, which isn't that bad, but in the grand scheme of things, not very good either. I mean, to be fair, it sold better than his previous project, getting 9,000 more sales than the last, but at the same time, it was beat out by Lil Tecca's new project, and it definitely didn't sell that 50k that I think a lot of people were expecting. And it's not just me saying it underperformed, because a lot of people on the Destroy Lonely subreddit are now complaining that the streams seem pretty low for a project like this, and they're wondering why. And I think I have a reason. Is it because of the allegations? I absolutely don't think so. Like I said before, I don't think Opium fans care about that whatsoever, and if anything, it would probably get the project more attention because a lot of people already got their eyes on him and are probably curious what he would make. I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that he's still making that generic Opium music, which has now become so oversaturated and watered down that not only can people find it from other members of his own label, but from many other underground artists within the scene as well. When everybody's making that same style of music, it becomes very, very hard to stand out unless you're doing something completely different with it, which in my opinion, Destroy Lonely is absolutely not doing. And on top of that, at his own label, he's being overshadowed by Ken Carson and Playboi Carti, basically making him the third member of Opium, and that's almost all he's got for a persona. Not a lot of people are going to check out Destroy Lonely on his own. They only want to check out Destroy Lonely and Ken Carson. I know a lot of people are going to look at this as glazing, but this comes from an outside perspective of somebody who really doesn't listen to this type of music all that much. I definitely think that Ken Carson could stand on his own 2 feet. If he didn't have Opium, he would still be popular, but for Destroy Lonely, Opium is all he has. I mean, he wasn't really popping before Opium. Once he got signed to them, they basically created his whole persona, and at this point, he's doing everything he can to break it down. down by lashing out and acting corny. And it's not even like the other members of the label don't have their own allegations. Apparently absolutely everybody in Opium except for one of the members of Homicide Gang have allegations. I think it solely comes down to the fact that Destroy Lonely reacted so poorly towards them that a lot of people now know him more for his allegations than his actual music. And then finally, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that he popped off on TikTok. I mean, don't get me wrong, that's definitely a good way to get your music out there, but when it comes to building an actually solid fan base that wants to follow you in everything that you do, TikTok is not the way to go. And at this point, I truly believe that Destroy Lonely has a very strong fan base, but it's basically only the Opium fan base. There's no real Destroy Lonely on its own fan base. They only really care about him with Cardi, they only really care about him with Ken, they only really care about him with the label. So if you take that all away and outshine him, then this is what you're gonna get. I mean, he's doing well, but with all that label push, he probably should be doing better. But let's wait and see. I mean, just because Ken Carson blew up after only 3 projects doesn't mean Destroy Lonely is going to be exactly the same. I mean, it's totally possible that next year he'll drop another project with a bunch of TikTok hits on it, he'll get a bunch more gold records, and then he'll end up selling even better than Ken Carson, maybe even becoming bigger than Cardi. I mean, personally, I couldn't see it, but it could happen. But yeah, with all that said, as of right now, that's basically the entire story of Destroy Lonely. So yeah, if you liked the video and you stuck around all the way to the end, make sure to leave some knife emojis below, knife gang, that's for all the people who stick around. And as for all the Opium fans that probably already left at this point, make sure to go down to the comments and tell me that you want to kill me and that I got everything in this video wrong. That will definitely help me out in the algorithm, but nah, for real. Subscribe to the channel, let me know who you want to see next, and with that said, I will see you in the next one. Opium forever.